Yes. Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I'm the Senior Director for Institutional Research and Diversity at the AAVMC. On this episode of the podcast, today we're going to discuss that notable monograph that folks have been chattering about, that AAVMC recently published on bias in the veterinary admissions process. And as I mentioned, seen some chatter on some boards, see some chatter here and there on the Twitters, on the Facebook, social media, about whether or not the work, whether or not the data really show, is it really biased or is it maybe something else? So I thought, well, this is why we have this platform. Why don't we just have the authors on to chat about it here on the show? So I am delighted to welcome my friend and wonderful colleague, Dr. Jim Lloyd, primary author on that monograph, to talk about the paper, what we actually found and what it means for the future of veterinary admissions. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Doing well, Lisa. It's great to be here today.
It is wonderful to be here with you. So for folks that don't know the illustrious Dr. Jim Lloyd, why don't you tell the people about yourself?
Well, I don't know where to start. I guess I'll just a thumbnail. I'm now a has-been, Lisa. I was Dean of the University of Florida College of Veterinary Medicine for 6 years, up until about this time 2 years ago. And I've been doing some consulting ever since. And one of the projects has been with the AAVMC, obviously. Prior to that, I spent my entire year at Michigan State University on the faculty and in various administrative roles. And I guess that's in short of it. In addition to being a veterinarian, I'm an economist. And so I see the world a little differently at times and through a little different lens. And that kind of lends to some of the analysis and things that we do.
Wonderful, welcome. And as somebody who lives on the humanities side of the house, I, along with my wonderful colleague, our colleague Matt Saloy at AVMA, we like to remind folks that economists, they live on the social science side of the house. So just saying, I love that you have a foot in both worlds. Right? So why don't we get to the money question? Like just off the jump, is there evidence of bias nationally in veterinary admissions?
Well, if you've looked at the monograph at all, you'll know that the answer is yes. There's evidence of bias.
So how is that showing up? How is that showing up? How do we know?
I'll say it first. I apologize to our listeners. My mic kind of splits in and out sometimes, and so we'll do the best we can. And Lisa, you'll give me heads up when it does. So the bias is shown up along a number of different dimensions. The ones we think about first and foremost, probably along the dimensions of race, ethnicity, and gender identity. And so there are advantages and disadvantages depending on what dimension we look at and which factor in the admissions or application process. But there's also evidence of bias along socioeconomic status. The factor that we used was Pell Grant recipient as an indicator of wealth, family wealth. There's also evidence of bias along the first generation status. Did your parents go to college or not? And also, surprisingly a bit, some bias along the dimension of where you grew up, what kind of a community you grew up in, whether it was rural or not, and what kind of community you'd like to work in, whether it's rural or suburban. And so, all those things are important for us to think about as we think about the veterinary profession going forward and meeting the needs of society and representing the society.
Yeah. So clearly something is happening, right? And it's happening and it's disproportionately affecting some populations and not others. But, for a number, some of the chatter that I've heard is, well, admissions committees don't always know that, someone is first gen, or that they're, a Pell Grant recipient, or, whatever. So, you know, let's kind of go back a bit. Where are those opportunities to kind of introduce bias kind of upstream into the process?
There's opportunities for bias all the way along, all the way from when you define the admissions requirements, the pre-vet requirements. What that does, it can do, is result in a bias in who shows up, who
Yeah.
actually applies. All right, and then we get into the process of how difficult it is for particular groups to achieve those requirements, to meet those requirements, to check those boxes. Some groups have an easier time than others. It doesn't turn out to be a level playing field. And then, of course, in the admissions and the selection process itself, that both the criteria used for selection and the process. And Lisa, I don't for a second want to suggest that any of this bias is intentional. It's not.
Right. Yeah.
We've designed admissions or application processes with bias in mind, that we want to favor or disadvantage different groups. But it is the fact that it's unintentional and it's unintended that makes it important for us to highlight that through these types of analyses, and point out where some of those constraints are, where some of the barriers are that we didn't anticipate.
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the things I know, a lot of folks that have heard me over the last couple of years have just really been kind of banging my little like tinkling triangle, saying, hey, we need to really think about what is it that we expect and want, and what do we mean, when we ask for, veterinary experience. Right. Folks that know me know that that's like something that gets my dander up a bit. Like, what is it, what are students or applicants, prospective applicants, supposed to be getting from those experiences? Does everybody really have access to be able to get that kind of experience? What role does it really play? A lot of times we hear, well, we want them to know what they're getting into. And I'm like, that is cool. I'm gonna need a learning objective, right? And so I'm gonna need something a little bit more concrete. What exactly does that mean? But what we found in the data is that that particular requirement kind of puts us on a slippery slope.
So Lisa, if we think about the three experiences,
Right.
the veterinary experience, the animal experience, and the research experience, we didn't find any relationship between the number of hours of veterinary experience or animal experience and the likelihood of receiving an offer of admission. There was a relationship between research hours and the likelihood of admission. The more research hours, the more likely to get an offer of admission. But what we did also find was that some groups had greater difficulty in actually achieving those hours of experience, and were disadvantaged in that regard. And whether or not the data tell us that more was better, gave you a better chance, it just kind of comes into the back of your mind that, you know what, the more I get, the better I'm gonna do, the more prepared I'm gonna be. The other thing that's critical about these experience hours is there were some questions about who, especially in the veterinary experience, who was your mentor and what was the quality of your experience. And we also found significant differences in who mentored the particular candidates, again, by the group that they were in, and how they evaluate the quality of that experience. And so it isn't the same for everybody.
Yeah, it's not the same. And so with that, the mentoring and also kind of who spent the more time with whom in, the clinic setting, we certainly found some differences along gender. And we also, one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that we don't really talk about the role that veterinary technicians and certified and registered veterinary technicians play in, you know, mentoring, coaching, and having students shadow them. And yet, you know, when we talk about like letters of recommendation, those aren't the folks that we're looking for the letters from, right? But we also know that not all of the prospective applicants are spending most of their time with veterinarians. They're spending them with those wonderful techs.
Yeah, yeah, and again, that was a bit of a surprise as we looked at the data, but you're absolutely right, and not to diminish the quality of the experience of the veterinary technician, but it does speak for the fact that it's not the experience, the opportunity isn't the same for everybody.
Yeah. So let's really get into who was really impacted, right? Who was really, you know, what does the data show? Because I know that there are lots of folks who love data like we do. And then there are lots of folks that are like, well, back in my day, X, Y, and Z was true. And that is absolutely, we validate the lived experience of individuals. However, like, you know, brass tacks, who's kind of, you know, really maybe potentially getting the short end here?
Well, I can flip it either way, the short end or the long end. The groups that actually have the advantage that benefit from that are white students, they're males, they're from wealthy backgrounds, non-Pell recipients, we'll say. They're from suburban backgrounds, okay? And they aren't, as a rule, first generation college students. Their parents went to college. So the flip of that is the disadvantaged groups in general. The broad group is the underrepresented groups in veterinary medicine, those who are not white. The females identify as females in the group. Those who were Pell Grant recipients, those who were first generation college students, and those who mainly grew up or aspire to practice in rural backgrounds. Those are the ones that were most commonly found to be disadvantaged in some dimension as we went through.
Yeah. And so yeah, I mean, there are different pieces for different groups, right? So can we kind of go into, you know, maybe take a deep dive into one of those areas, right? Maybe like that mentorship piece. So what did you find?
Well, I'm trying to remember exactly their results there, Lisa, but for those groups that were disadvantaged, I can't script out exactly which was which, okay? But I do know that the underrepresented students in veterinary medicine, the URVM students, were less likely as a group to spend the time with the veterinarian and as opposed to a technician in the practice. And they were more likely they didn't rate the experience quite as high, quite as well. They all valued the experience very highly, which is important. Everybody thought it was a valuable experience, but they didn't rate the quality of the experience as high as either the white students or the male students.
The male students,
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so, you know, one of the criticisms of the monograph has been, well, is this really bias? Is it really, you know? And I think that our response really has been, well, look at all of this data in total and give us an explanation for how it wouldn't be. Right? Like, so, I mean, it's just so many potential layers.
Well, it is. And again, my inability to recall, we did, and one of the criticisms or suggestions, well, you did so many tests. Aren't you going to get some false positive? Well, absolutely we will. But just the evidence in the broad sense was so overwhelming that there just are so many indicators of bias in the analysis. And again, on the group, on the particular factor we looked at. And I think the other thing that helps with the credibility is a very broad-based study. This is across all the veterinary schools that use the VMCAS application service. And so it from that standpoint, it is robust as well, I'd say. And you know, again, not intentional, not designed to be this way, but certainly the numbers don't lie. And there's just enough, again, if you look at the paper, you'll see there are just enough of these indicators. It pops up here, it pops up there. And it just, at the end of the day, you look at the overwhelming body of evidence, and it's pretty clear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, one of the other questions that I had received was, well, how can men be advantaged, right? When they make up such a small percentage of the applicant pool. This year, they only make up about 12% of the pool. You know, how is it possible? Because their numbers are just so small. And I'm like, and yet they still make up 18% of our enrollment, which, you know, you actually don't have to pull out SPSS or Minitab or R to see that there's an advantage there, right? But you know, but that is a part of you know, the reality that we've been that there are now some concrete things that we can kind of point to show, you know, here's kind of what's happening. I think it's really important to just again state it's not, we don't believe anyone is kind of setting out to say really want to keep folks out. Right. I don't think that that's certainly not what we're saying. And we also know from some of your previous work, Jim, that our applicant pool is pretty deep, and folks really kind of worry about the quality of the pool, but it's a deep pool.
It is a deep pool, but I'm glad you brought that up, because there was another piece I was thinking I want to go back and reemphasize. We did all these statistical tests, and again, we did lots of them. And so you think about, what does that mean statistically? Well, some of them, a lot of them, in fact, if we look at African Americans as a group, there were a lot of tests that we did where there was not any significant difference. Well, in a sense, that's good news on a surface, but there's so few African American candidates in the pool. That statistically we can say that, you know what, the numbers are so small that if in fact there was a greater representation, the trends that we see, it ends up having the low numbers, a high variance. We'll just say that. And so those would be the tests that if I was going to question. So again, in the broader brush, the bias is real, but the other thing that we're worried about is what impact does the application process, the application requirements, the admissions process, what impact is it having directly or indirectly on who shows up, who actually decides to engage in the application process. In fact, some of that bias in the selection process that we're seeing might indirectly be resulting in the low representation in the application.
Yeah. So really, what does it mean for the pool when we know that we've got an amazing amount of talent in our pool? You know, we tell people all the time, like, the difference between, you know, the #1 ranked candidate and the number, you know, 3,000 ranked candidate oftentimes is really just decimals, right? Yeah. Right.
Well, and you know, it's a challenge. As dean, I used to try to answer parents' questions or respond to their inquiries by saying, you know what, we just don't have enough seats for all the good candidates. And the second part, I'll admit readily, as a dean, as a former associate dean, now as an analyst, you know, there has never been a perfect admissions process design. We do the best that we can. But you know, it is reassuring, Lisa, when we look at the quality of the pool, to know that it is deep and that we do have quality applicants there. So, again, as we work, we continue to work to improve the process and to identify and when appropriate, to make changes to eliminate the bias.
Yeah. So I'm going to take the liberty of having a brief commercial break and promoting the AAVMC Community Reads, which we launched just a few weeks ago. We are currently reading The Merit Myth: How Our Colleges Favor the Rich and Divide America by Anthony Carnevale, Jeff Strohl, and Peter Schmidt. Really, really great book on kind of just understanding merit as a construct, but also how merit and ideas about merit have frankly perverted admissions in higher ed in general. Pro tip, the word merit actually earlier in the last century, around the, I don't know, 40s or 50s or so, merit actually had been used as a pejorative. Like, it was really not, it was used to kind of make fun of this artifice that was emerging of, we want this kind of candidate. And so, the whole kind of undergirding around merit was about, frankly, keeping people out rather than letting people in. So if you want to join us in AAVMC Reads, you can come visit our website and sign up. We will be starting online discussions soon. So bringing it back, what are some things that, we don't make a lot of recommendations in the monograph, but, what are some of the things that we, can think about for admissions committees and kind of, encourage?
Well, first I'm going to roll back to your commercial and say, and on the bookshelf on my over my shoulder, you'll see that book there, and it's an outstanding read. So it's so germane to this very conversation. But so back to your question, what can we recommend? What can veterinary schools do? First thing, I mentioned this is a broad-based study. It was a broad-based study. It was across all schools, and so it was that makes it a robust study, I think. But it also doesn't say a lot about any specific program. So, you know what, you just got to get the data, dig in and look at, gee, what's going on in our own program? What are the outcomes we're achieving? And then along the way to think about what is it that we're requiring for a pre-vet requirement, both in the terms of courses, because some courses are not always readily available. Some course requirements can be actually barriers, constraints. How many hours do we need? How many hours of what do we need? All those kind of questions. Okay. And then to look at the selection process and the criteria used in the selection process. Everything we can do to remove any sort of unforeseen barriers there. The other thing that we do mention in the paper is that highly recommend admission committees and staff, I'll say, to do regular training in implicit bias, and to do as much of their own work as they can. This is something that, and if you don't keep the edges fresh, I'll say as a former clinician, if you don't keep the edges fresh, the healing doesn't happen very well. And so we don't keep current on it, and we don't keep our thinking and our ideas current. So implicit bias training, and just to continue to do it at every possible time. So yeah, I can't stress that enough. It's really, really important to really kind of think about bias and understanding. Again, it's not malicious, but unconscious bias, I tell people all the time, it is just a kind of unfortunate potential byproduct of the brain just really doing its job really efficiently, right? And so some things kind of get jumbled along the way, and then we act on that. And so, so what do we say then to, some folks that are really kind of like, I just don't really buy all this. Like, this isn't a big problem. This isn't a real problem. Certainly, sometimes those folks are also like, this D&I thing, but really kind of, how do we kind of talk about this in a really meaningful way? Well, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I guess I'll roll back and say, if our goal is to work toward enhancing diversity in veterinary medicine, then we've got to have these conversations. We've got to do these analyses. We've got and the question is, why do we need to do that? The question to me is clear. You ask a question about who's impacted in the general sense. In the specific sense, we talked about various groups, but really the students that are impacted by this are not only the students who don't get accepted, but also the students who do get accepted. The learning process is not nearly as rich in a homogeneous environment as it is when we've got diversity of thought, diversity of approaches, diversity of lived and life experiences, diversity of questions in the classroom, diversity of context for answering the questions and in solving the animal health challenges that we're facing. So really, that's what we work toward, a better learning experience in the college level, and then ultimately we're better as a profession when we're more diverse. We've got better problem solvers. We have more approaches to the same problems, and we all know that makes a big difference. At the end of the day, it's the animals, the animal owners, and in a broad sense, the society we seek to serve. I'll say we seek to serve. We do serve society. I believe veterinary medicine does a good job, but we can do better. And if we can't adequately represent the experience and the lives and the perspectives of the society that we seek to serve, how can we adequately anticipate their needs or meet their needs? And so I'll just say that's the bottom line, Lisa. That's why we need to strive for this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I wholeheartedly agree. And, a lot of times folks are like, oh, but the animals, especially in small animal practice, right? Or even kind of some farming practices, but folks are like, the animals don't care. And I'm always quick to remind folks that when Barkley, my wonderful dog, is able to transport himself to shout out at Delray Animal Hospital with his own debit card, then, have at it.
Well, if we think about it as well, Lisa, some animals, the companion animals especially, don't get a chance to see a veterinarian because there's not a veterinarian who looks like me, who literally or figuratively speaks my language, or maybe understands my socioeconomic context, whether it's a rural environment and the challenges and different perspectives we face there, or whether it's one where I just don't have the wealth, the means of the family household income to do what I might recommend from my life view. And so we need to have a different approach so that those animals can get the best care possible. And so again, without having that diversity of thought and diversity of experience in the applicant pool, in the classroom, and ultimately in the profession, we just aren't going to be able to meet the needs as well as we could.
Yeah. So, last question, what do you hope comes out of this? And what do you think we should work on next?
Well, first of all, I'd like people to understand that and to really respect the fact that the admissions process is a complex, multifactorial process, right? It isn't an easy thing to do. There, again, as I said before, there's never been a perfect admissions process, and never will be. We're all doing the best we can, and the other thing I'd like people to know is that by doing this deep dive, AAVMC is leading the way in saying that we want to do better. We want to look at what we're doing. We want to be introspective. We want to identify the things we're doing well, save those, but also identify the opportunities for improvement, and then where appropriate, build processes around it, and then monitor the outcome of those processes. Don't just flip the switch and go on about business and say, okay, we fixed that one, we'll go on to something else. Monitor the outcomes of that and to walk through it. The other thing I guess I would like is that the outcome of this research to send a signal not only to the profession about how important this is to us as educators, and to educators how important this is, or should be to us, but also to prospective applicants. Those who have looked at some of the barriers, whether they're real or perceived, or looked at some of the requirements, looked at some of the, and a little, you know what, we're on it. We're working on it, and don't turn away from us for that. Veterinary medicine is such a rewarding career, and can be so impactful on people's lives, on animals' lives, and just a great way to spend your life. I'll just say that. It gets a little corny at that point, but seriously, don't back away, don't turn away from us based on that. We're working on it. Give it a shot, and by the time you come through this process, we're going to have it fixed.
Yeah. So we do actually have a question And that question is, did you see any differences with applicants who did core requirements at community college versus four-year institution or online? And we don't, I can say that we don't distinguish in the survey about online or in person. So.
But there was a difference, you know, even though it was slight, and we use the words in you know, it's the old statistical thing. Is it 0.05 or is it 0.1? You know, I think a 10% chance is anyhow, that it's my own bias. So we report those, identify them as trends or tendencies rather than significant differences. But for the community college attendees, yes, if you attended a community college, it has an impact and how that manifests itself, whether it's just a perception or what, again, it's hard to say because of the process, but absolutely there's an impact of community college.
I mean, I think it's important to note that, you know, roughly about half of our applicants have some community college credits. And, you know, on average, the amount for those folks who do take community college credits, they typically take about a whole year's worth, right? About 30 or so credits. And so, you know, a lot of them are taking them certainly for cost and accessibility to kind of keep costs down. But there's also a really amazing population. I think it's like about 20% of that population that also take them. They're starting those community college courses as dual enrollees, right, in high school. And so, so it's not just, you know, just cost or those kinds of things, but folks are really kind of, you know, these are really amazing applicants who are looking for those challenges, and they're looking for them early, even in high school, to take those community college courses. And so, you know, I think that from my perspective, then when they get to, you know, the four-year institution, whether they transferred or not, they can go right into those core requirements. But they've also made space for some of those other courses that folks like me think are really, really important, like maybe more community and more communications courses, some, you know, courses in some of those social sciences that can kind of help with the just content and curriculum exposure around issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, you know, kind of just understanding socioeconomics, basic socioeconomics, right? And really kind of understanding kind of what's happening around them so that they can kind of have a bit of, you know, context for the future and kind of where they do their work and how they do their work. So can you talk a little bit though, you know, I do want to double back, even though it sounded like we were going to wrap up, but I'm not going to let you off the hook just yet. So can we talk about what you found with rural applicants? Because I think that that's certainly an area that a lot of folks talk about. We need more rural people that want to go into rural areas, which those applicants do say that they're more likely to say that they want to go into rural practice, and there's a need for that. But we also found that in some areas they may be disadvantaged in the process.
You know, it can manifest itself in a number of ways, whether it's just, you know, so just the fact that you lived in a rural community, grew up in a rural, or want to practice is probably, you know, not the driver. It probably is manifest itself through one of a number of different routes. Maybe in a rural community, you're more likely to be a first-generation college student. Maybe you're more likely to be a Pell Grant recipient. One of the most, as you were talking about the high school students taking community college credits, one that I know happens is that we found that students who had access to or who took advanced placement AP courses in high school were more likely to get to receive at least one offer of admission. Well, I know from a fact that that not all rural high schools have AP classes available. And so it's a combination of those factors. Does it mean that individual is going to be any less likely to be successful as a veterinarian? The answer is no. but somehow that AP thing has worked through, and or some of the other factors have snuck in. And you know, how does socioeconomics have an impact? You know, and so to the extent that many schools have up until now, and some still do use standardized testing scores part of the admissions process, the GRE specifically. Well, if you have the money to take a GRE prep course, it's clear and it's well documented in the literature that you're going to do better on the GRE, which in a sense, if that's part of the admissions process and the selection criteria is how well you did on those tests, well, if you've got more money and can take those prep courses, one or two or however many of them, and you're going to do better. So again, some of those, it is a complex process. And so it just really, again, signals that we need to take a step back. How much of this is real? How much do we really need to have? How much do we rely on these various indicators? And look at the data to see how much are those indicators revealing or ending up in a bias in the selection process.
Yes, yes. And again, shameless commercial plug. There's a whole chapter just devoted to standardized testing and the rise of standardized testing, which, you know, again, plot spoiler, standardized tests were developed to keep people out rather than to let people in. I do want to acknowledge that there was a question in the chat. I have answered it. To build on the question, what if all prereqs were taken at a community college? Does that make a difference? We don't ask the question in a way that really allows us to get at that. So we really can't, we just can't answer that. But it does appear that many of our applicants are taking more gen ed classes, again, because of when they choose to take them, why they're taking them, those kinds of things really point to more getting those general education courses, air quote, out of the way, which again, I'm a big fan of the liberal general education, liberal arts curricula. So I hate saying getting them out of the way, but I can acknowledge that in pre-professional curricula, a lot of folks, kind of skew that way. And so, but we don't really ask the question in such a way that allows us to get at that. So any parting words and thoughts of, offers of wisdom?
Well, we didn't in this study look at the GRE specifically. That's a whole nother podcast perhaps, but it's a whole nother topic. And there is some very good material in the book you're talking about that. We also have a kind of an essay that I wrote as part of my work with the AAVMC that's available as well that talks about the GRE. So that's another one that we could again spend a lot of time. But just in general, again, I just go back to the fact that this is not intended to call people out for an intentional bias process. It just says, you know what, we need to always, and probably in everything we do, look at the outcomes because we get unintended outcomes, unintentional outcomes. And when we do, we need to kind of loop back, see what it is that's leading to that outcome and then see what we can do to improve it. There's no question that we have to, as a veterinary medical profession, if we're going to remain relevant, if we're going to continue to grow with an increasingly diverse society, we've got to diversify our profession. And this is a key part of it. In the admissions process, applications and admissions, that's the front door to veterinary medicine. And so it all starts right here. So it's vital that we get after it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. The last question is from Dr. Hilda Mejia Brew, asking, what is the future study? What are we going to be looking at next? I can tell you what I am certainly interested in, and certainly the essay piece that Jim will have related to the GRE, but I'm also really interested in kind of looking at debt and really kind of understanding, applicants' relationship with undergraduate debt as they're kind of coming to the door, and how does that shape the places that they apply, where they apply, how they make those decisions. We do know that it does impact, where they apply. It impacts offer, whether or not they accept an offer. Some of the early research a few years ago certainly shows that, the world is your oyster at the time of application, right? Yes, folks are thinking about it. They are trying to make good decisions, but they're kind of right now. I think that the average number of schools that folks are applying to is about 4 or 5, and folks are trying to look strategically in making those decisions. But we also know that well over half of our applicants do not have debt at the time of making application. This year, I think it was about 58%. They report that is largely because of family support. Now, that doesn't mean that their parents are rolling in it. It certainly may mean, and I certainly know just, again, anecdotally, that a lot of parents are shouldering that debt themselves in order to, kind of help students remain debt-free. And if they were kind of like my parents, they were like, we will assist you in undergrad. All the rest of that stuff beyond that, you're on your own. But we also know that about 20% of our graduates do not have debt. And, I think that there's hopefully some lessons to be learned there about how they're doing that, but also recognizing that some of the populations that we've mentioned today are not graduating undergrad without debt. They are graduating with, roughly $30,000 to $35,000 worth of debt, sometimes more. There are some applicants who have gone to, amazing, yet very costly undergraduate institutions and are coming in, with a lot of debt. And so, at least for me, I'm interested in looking at that, because I think that there is also this thread for folks that that do care about marginalized and underrepresented populations, saying, is this really, what are the ethics around recruiting into a profession that graduates with so much debt? And I think that's an important question, but I think that it's also important to recognize that a lot of times those populations have a very different relationship with debt. Those of us with some resources are way more afraid of losing those resources than folks who with limited resources are about losing more resources, right? And so for me anyway, that's something that I'm interested in, and certainly looking at. Anything that you want to look at, Jim?
No, I was going to say, we did find some very preliminary results in this study that we report in the paper about. I mean, it kind of rolls into that whole socioeconomic status thing, but the relationship between debt and both their confidence in their application and in their probability, likelihood of receiving an admissions offer. And so I think there is much more to unpack there. They said it really is important. Whether that is an effect through, if I'm carrying a certain amount of debt, I'm less likely to apply to more schools. I think that, and we found that the more schools you apply to, the more likely you are to get an offer, which only makes sense. So, I mean, as we dig into that, I think that makes sense.
All right. And so I think that we'll put a pin in it there. So this has been another episode of AAVMC's Diversity and Inclusion on Air. To my guest, Jim, Lloyd, thank you so much for joining me. For our viewers and listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app and like us on Facebook. Shout out to the Apple Podcast folks. I'm hoping to get the show back up on that platform soon, so stay tuned. Until then, thanks for joining us and thanks for listening.
Thank you all.